So I want to talk about some research that I conducted in collaboration with a number of other people on working dogs. Now, this research had a lot of really important application. The research I do tends not to have a lot of application, tends to be more theoretical. So this was a lot of fun for me to work on, but it also demonstrates a lot of principles of basic associative learning. So while I was at Oxford University doing a postdoc, I did work with starlings, but I also helped and collaborated with a company that was just developing at the time called Oxford Risk, which still exists. And the idea of Oxford Risk, this company, was to advise people about risk, about the perception of risk and risk taking, especially around the idea of economic risk. Now, mostly the work that we did at Oxford was with animal models, but those animal models could really apply to issues in the real world. For example, people who worked for Oxford Risk would consult with oil companies about risk taking in where to dig. They did a lot of work with insurance companies and hospitals in the UK. And they would take on just about any kind of research related to risk or animal behavior. And the idea was to bring in people like postdocs, which I was a postdoc at the time, and also professors to consult about theories and applications of understanding decision making. Well, while I was at Fresno State for several years, I would go back to Oxford on occasion to visit and to do some collaborative research. And while I was there talking about some research with starlings, they had a meeting with representatives from the Ministry of Defense in England. And they were concerned that their bomb detecting dogs weren't as accurate as they were hoping. And is there any way of investigating just how accurate these animals are in the field? And I was fortunate to be invited and sit in on these meetings. And after they described their dogs and their dog training and their dogs in the field, I said, yeah, likely you have many problems that are connected to associative learning. For example, the dogs are extremely well trained in a laboratory or in a training facility, and they can detect a number of different types of explosives, and they are trained using basic principles of classical conditioning and instrumental conditioning and reward training, and these dogs are fantastic. However, they don't find bombs in the field unless they are working to detect mines in a military zone. Why don't they detect bombs in the field? Because there aren't bombs to be found, or extremely rarely. If these are drug detecting dogs, they'll find those often, or dogs that detect agriculture, invasive species at an airport, they're going to detect. But if a bomb is searching like Wimbledon Stadium before a concert to look for bombs, they're not going to find them because they're not there. And the very, very rare time that they'd be there, they wondered, are they going to find them? And I said, you have problems related to extinction and discrimination. The animals are smart. They discriminate the training facility where bombs and explosives can be found all the time and the field where they aren't. So they will search with great attention in the training facility, but likely will lose attention in the field because they aren't finding explosives. And you can't really put explosives out in the field for them to find. So they're going to go through extinction. So a friend of mine who was also doing a postdoc scene there, that's Dr. Ed Mitchell, who is a psychiatrist now, a very good friend. We did our postdocs together. We would always go to this restaurant called St. Giles for breakfast. And this is a traditional English breakfast with French fries, lots of different hams and sausages and eggs, probably about 2,000 calories, but oh, so delicious. And then Alex Kosalnik, who was my advisor and who's professor of in the behavioral ecology research group, knows a great deal about risk. And another person named Lord John Krebs. He was a lord, and he is a very famous animal behaviorist. His father discovered the Krebs cycle in cellular respiration. And I would get emails from them as we worked on this project together. Let me tell you, it's kind of cool getting an email from a lord. And of course, representatives from the Ministry of Defense, and then Auburn University in Alabama, who had a training facility for dogs. And there was a lot of funding behind this, and we paid the people at Auburn University to use their dogs that had been certified to find explosives. And I got to go to Auburn a few times, and Ed and I and Alex and Dr. Krebs worked on designing an experiment that could see if animals are having the problems that we suspect they might. The work that we did was published in 2015, Performance Decline by Search Dogs in Repetitive Tasks and Mitigation Strategies. So the idea was to find out the problems and then come up with some solutions that the Ministry of Defense could use to better train their dogs to be more accurate. So here is the training. All dogs, there were 21 of them, were given equal training on 3 types of explosives. Now the dogs don't know these are dangerous, they just know these are an odor I have to find, I have to locate. And they were also given training on 1 additional odor to find. We called that the silver standard odor. And it might be something like the scent of orange. So they were trained to search through a room and find explosives, and they're rewarded with being able to play with a ball, which was really fun to watch them being trained because they just loved to play with the ball, and they really searched hard so that if they found what they were looking for, they got rewarded with a ball. We had 3 groups in our experiment, each with 7 dogs. We called these the copper group, the silver group, and the gold group. And after they were certified trained at the facility, we went to an abandoned schoolhouse that had many rooms in it that we were allowed to do our research in. And for several months, the dogs were taken there by their handlers to search for explosives. Now, the handlers don't know what group they're in, right? They were blind to this. They just had their dog, and they had to take their dog around to these different rooms and search for explosives. And over the course of those couple months of training every day, of going in and looking, the copper group found nothing. There was nothing to find. This is really typical of a dog looking for explosives in the field. They don't find anything because there's nothing to find. The silver group was allowed to find the silver standard odor. In other words, there was orange there, hidden under the scent of orange, hidden under a table or over there by a chair. And when the animals found it, they gave their behavioral indication and they were rewarded. The gold group got to find explosives. And these are just small amounts of explosives placed, and these are, think of it as not bomb, but actually just the scent of these explosives. And they were located throughout the building. And that's what they got to find. So we also had what were called vigilant points. These were points set out in each room, and an observer watched the dog search. The dog searched in 2 ways. Searched while being led by a trainer on a leash, and searched by itself, taken off the leash, and the dog could just go inside this room and search around. And these vigilant points were only known by an observer. In other words, did the dog stick its nose in a point? This is only to measure how detailed was the dog's search. This isn't where the bombs were or the explosives. This is just a point. did the dog stick its nose into these different places? That gives us a measure of attention and a measure of vigilance. And we also measured if they found the explosives, because the observer knew where the explosives were in this building. For group silver and gold. Copper, again, there were nothing, but of course we were curious into how well they searched. Day after day after day, they did this. Then, unbeknownst to the observer, unbeknownst to the trainers who brought the dogs, explosives were put into this schoolhouse. So animals searched this place for a couple months, and then, unbeknownst to anybody except for one person, they went there early in the morning and they put little explosives around the room. So now we're measuring how well the dogs in the silver group and the gold group found either the orange odor or the explosives during the 2 months of searching. Of course, the copper group can't find anything. How vigilant they searched, and then whether they found the bombs, the explosives, once they were there at the end. So here is just the accuracy of finding the explosives or the odor that they had to find. This is during the training sessions, the working phase. We call this the working phase. And you can see that the gold group were pretty good about, on average, the 7 dogs finding the explosives. They weren't perfect. That's 100% right here. They found every single one of them. But 70, 80, 90% right in here. The silver group, who was just smelling for the orange, there were no explosives, they did pretty well too. Then, in the test phase, there were 7 times. There were 21 sessions, these are 3-block sessions, where there were actually explosives to be found. This is after many weeks of training. And you can see the silver group here, even though there wasn't orange to be found, there was the explosive to be found, and the animals were trained to find orange and the explosive. They were pretty good. 90%, they were good. They found it. The gold group, they were great. They found the explosives. But if you look at the copper group, these are the groups these are the dogs that found nothing for weeks in this school area. They didn't find the bomb, the first bomb, the couple of bombs that were there. They were terrible at it. They found it 20% of the time on average, even after several sessions. And then eventually they started finding it, and once they go, okay, there are explosives to be found here, they got very vigilant very quickly once they found a couple. But that doesn't really help us, because if there's a bomb, let's say, at a venue that's being searched, where politicians are going there or some concert is there, and the dogs have been searching out in the field for weeks and haven't found anything, they aren't going to be searching very diligently when they're out in the field, and so they're probably not going to find stuff. That is really, really bad performance. This is the accuracy on just the explosives in the first 2 targets to be found. Well, dog 1, Super Dog, that dog never found anything in this area, and then there were 2 explosives to find in the first couple sessions, and they found them. That's great. Good dog. And this group, this animal number 5, he found one of them, one of the 2. The other groups were pretty good. They were pretty good about finding the first 2 targets. But animal 2, 3, 4, 6, and 7 in the copper group, the dogs that searched this area for weeks, when it was actually time to find the explosives, they didn't find any of them. Not so good. Here's the vigilance of how well they searched. Whether they hit the 3 vigilant points in the room. There aren't explosives in the vigilant points. It's just a vigilant point is next to the bookcase. A vigilant point is next to the desk. And only the observer knew the vigilant point. And what you see is they all started, hey, we're really searching. But the copper group, week after week, found nothing. Session after session, and they just stopped searching. They just stopped searching. The other groups searched pretty well. They searched pretty well. And then during the test phase, when there were actually explosives, their vigilance was pretty good. Pretty good. But it took a while for the copper group to start increasing their vigilance of how well they searched. This is their vigilance when they were being led on a leash. And you can see the vigilant points are really much higher because the trainer is literally taking the dog by the leash around the room. The trainer doesn't know where the vigilant points are, but they do know that they need to lead their dog to different areas of the room. However, the copper group, the group that there was no explosives to be found for weeks, even led on the leash, they began to search less and less. This isn't a dog problem. This is a human problem. The humans got lazy. The trainers, because they had been week after week not finding anything, they just stopped leading the dogs to a detailed search of the room. That can be a real problem with dogs and working dogs in the field, the working dogs that have to search for bombs, explosives, guns, or drugs, or contraband, or things like this. They are really in touch with their human trainer. And if the human isn't into it, they're not into it. And that's what we saw as well. So we have a problem with dogs that search in the field for things that they won't find often, like explosives. Their attention is going to go down, their vigilance is going to go down, and their trainer's vigilance is going to go down. So conclusion was, yeah, you got some real problems with your dogs. And this isn't unique to the Ministry of Defense. This is a general problem of simple associative learning getting in the way. In the fact that they score perfectly in the training area, because the stimuli that are associated with searching with great vigilance are really strong. SR associations are really strong because what follows is rewarding because they find things and they get to play with their ball and they get all rewarded. Out in the field, they can search for hours. And you feel really good. These dogs are searching for these explosives, but in the field, these are not the same stimuli. This is a discrimination problem, a generalization decrement problem. Searching an area without finding a target made the dogs extremely ineffective. Adding a non-explosive target to find in the field could reduce this problem. In other words, don't take explosives out in the field, but train the dogs on all these types of explosives to find, and then train them on something else. The smell of lemon, the smell of peppermint, the smell of orange. Maybe find a good odor that isn't common in the field but isn't dangerous, and you can take a little dropper and drop little drops of orange odor around, and the dog is searching around, and they find the orange odor. They get the ball, they get praise. They get to find things in the field. If we look back here, finding only orange for a while did not hinder them from their ability to find the explosives once the explosives were available to be found, because they kept their attention. So before we could publish this paper, it had to go through a lot of signatures because this was confidential. It was funded by the Ministry of Defense. Maybe they didn't want to get all this information about how bad their dogs were out to the public. So after a while, they said, yes, you can publish it. And we published our paper. I went to Oxford, met with the Ministry of Defense, and gave a talk. About what we found and why we found and how it's related to associative learning. And I wrote up a very long report about this, and I said, these are the problems, this is what we found, these are the problems you're having with your dogs, and here are some possible solutions. And I worked with this paper with Alex Kosalnik and Ed, and we presented it to them and said, I think you have some problems. And about a year after that, I got a call from Oxford, email, to get on a meeting because the Ministry of Defense, this paper got around and we're like, oh, we got some problems. And they asked a question. They said, well, the dog experiment was extremely expensive, 21 dogs. There's these fundamental problems. Can we investigate ways of solving these problems, improving these dogs? But could we use rats? Can we, because we could run a lot more animals, we could outsource this to different researchers, and they could run experiments. And so what they asked me to do is they said, well, can you write a report? Can you write a report saying whether rats can be used as models for dogs, right? This is the general process approach. What one animal does in learning, others tend to do. There are rules about it. What are the advantages and what are the disadvantages of using rats as models for dogs? To work on things like extinction, discrimination, searching, and memory and spatial memory and all those things. So I wrote this very long report, and they flew me over there, and I had to give this big presentation about dogs and rats. And in my report, I talked about a few things. I said both of these animals have really excellent olfactory ability, really great ways of detecting odor. The olfactory bulb in humans is very tiny, it's very thin. But in dogs, it's rather large, and in rats, it's rather large. These animals are olfactory animals. That's their consciousness, that's their perception. They're mostly odor-related dogs. And so I said there would be really good physiologically when you look at the threshold at which these two animals, rats and dogs, can smell different odors. They have very similar results. And they have similar genes that go into their olfactory system. So I said as a scent detecting animal, rats would be fine. I also said that both dogs and rats have been used in the field. The Columbia police station will use drug detecting rats in the field. They'll come up to a house, they'll let their rat go, and the rat will go in and give some indication of whether there are narcotics there. And dogs are often used in detecting mines, but as you know, there are rats that are trained to detect mines. They actually have some advantages. The rats don't set off the mines because they're lighter than dogs. Rats also don't have that really strong connection with humans, so they aren't really influenced by whether the human is attending or not attending. So they have those advantages. And of course, they're a lot cheaper. So they have similar olfactory perception, they have similar training capabilities, and they're both used. The advantage of rats, you have more control over the stimuli in the environment than you would with dogs. They're less expensive. There's well-established protocols for training rats in scent detection. People already do that. It takes a lot less time to train them, less maturation time, so the experiment can go faster, and less confounding variables because the human isn't interacting. So I made some suggestions. I said you can do open field search and scent detection in rats. There are actually leashes that you can get for rats. See, I don't know if you know this, but a lot of people love rats as pets. And there's this whole subculture of people who buy stuff for their rats. And they take them around with leashes just like you would take around a dog with a leash. You can use reinforcement with reward. They really respond to that well. They're not going to respond to play behavior. Although I did talk about the fact that there's research on tickling rats. Yeah, you heard me right. There's all this whole research on the facts that rats really like to be tickled, and they make this sound that you can only hear because it has a really high frequency you can only hear with certain type of equipment, but they literally giggle. It's really funny. So you could reinforce them with something other than food, like you do a dog. You can also get into odor compound component perception. Is the rat able? Rats should be able to distinguish several different odors put together, including explosive odor perception. They should be just as good as dogs. And one of the things I suggested is that you could really replicate what you do with a dog, but with a rat. You could have them search an area, right? Not just pressing levers and stuff. You have them search. You could replicate this whole experiment with rats, but not a giant schoolhouse. You would just need a little area. And there's equipment that can monitor the animal's searching pattern and quantify it. There's a company called Noldus, and they make this thing called EthoVision, and all it does is videotapes, and then it tracks the rat's movement. And the longer they stay in one place, the more the image turns red, and you can quantify how much time they're spending in different areas. So I said we could do that. We could set up a little environment. We could set up vigilant points. We could put them on leash, off leash. We could video tape them and then track them with EthoVision. So our recommendation was there's no reason you can't use rats. You're not going to be able to deal well with that human-dog interaction problem, but there's good validity, construct validity, meaning we're measuring what we want to measure, which is searching for explosives. They can be more precise measures of vigilance and accuracy. I talked about that. EthoVision could act as a model for further research in discrimination, extinction, masking odors, variability in odors, variability in reinforcement, because you know how important variability in reinforcement is. And similar training has been done by Otto 2002 and Poland 2011. And finally, there's all this great literature on work on training rats for detection, right? So the company Apopo trains rats, these giant African pouch rats, to detect landmines, and they have to be certified, and they have been responsible for clearing thousands and thousands of mines and finding explosives and weapons. These are really well-trained animals. They even detect tuberculosis. They can, and you can see they are highly motivated. You reward them with this kind of delicious little paste. They stick their nose in something that smells like tuberculosis. So all you have to do is do a little throat swab, and these can be very accurate at detecting those diseases. They've also now been trained to search for cadavers and search for people that are trapped in rubble and stuff, places dogs can't get. So Apopo is a great non-governmental organization, and I highly recommend you go to this website and you read about all the wonderful things that they do with these rats in training them to detect diseases, explosives, weapons, drugs, a whole bunch of things. We did continue this work. I wasn't as involved with it after writing the paper on rats and dogs. Other people like Mark Boughton, who is a very famous learning theorist, he specializes in understanding extinction. We see Alex Kasalnik still working this, Faye Porritt, who was a member of the Ministry of Defense. They continued this work, and they did some work with rats on trying to promote consistent, persistent behavior, studies of extinction in rat models of search behavior in working dogs. So a lot has come out of this initial research.